This evening, I want to share a little something with you all that I was hoping would actually be picked up to be included in an upcoming anthology that is supposed to be being released in November. However, we are getting very close to November, and there still has been no updates to whether or not submissions have been accepted. They did say that if we chose to, we could, obviously, we would retain our rights and we could simultaneously publish. And so, because we are so close to Halloween, literally just a week away, I decided that tonight I would like to share a flash fiction story with you all. Now, it is important to note that there was a prompt that was utilized to inspire this, and that prompt was Mr. Roy is a lifelong skeptic, but when his terminally ill son is miraculously saved by holy water from the shrine of an ancient goddess, he begins to wonder if there's something more to placebos. And that was the prompt. And from that prompt, I created the following story entitled The Vessel. A story often begins out of nowhere, a walk into a hike, a day into night. And for Elias Royal, it was a bit of a lifetime spent building his world out of concrete and equations. And he liked to think that's all it was ever going to be. He wasn't the sort of man who was looking for eventful, but he did want to leave some sort of honest work legacy in his life. And that led him to becoming a genetic engineer. He was a man who believed in the structural integrity of science and the irrefutable logic of mathematics. And there had never been any real room for faith or spirituality in his life. He viewed it as a crutch, something people needed to get through the harsh realities of life. But as life would happen to throw some harsh realities at Elias, it hit him like an anvil in a cartoon when his 7-year-old son Leo ended up being the one whose body was failing the quiet, devastating fight against juvenile cancer, and it was efficiently unspooling his boy's thread right before his eyes. "It's stage 4, the doctor's grim voice murmured, low and so monotone Elias wasn't sure he'd fully heard it. "What?" he murmured. The doctor let out a low sigh. "I'm sorry, Mr. Royal. There's nothing more we can do." And that was it. Like a deflated balloon slowly losing its air. The doctor's words, devoid of hope, were the final nail in his poor son's coffin. Elias felt a shudder roll through his body. Miracles were for fairy tales. But as Leo's breathing became a ragged rattle and the boy's small, pale hand grew cold in his, Elias's wife Isla clung to a different truth. She had heard of the shrine of Saint Angetia, an ancient, crumbling temple rumored to house a source of spring water with rumored healing powers. "Isla, you can't be serious," Elias scoffed, his skepticism a shield against the pain. But in Isla's desperate eyes, he saw a plea he couldn't refuse. "Just hear me out, Eli, please. It can't hurt, can it?" She sucked in a breath, her voice gasping on the air as she fought back her tears. "I can't not do anything and just let my baby die, Elias." Something inside him sunk, and there was no way he could say no. "Fine, get in the Jeep." The jostle of the keys audible as he pulled them from his pocket and watched her visibly calm instantly. The entirety of the drive they drove in silence. It was as if the car had become a tomb of sorrow and a hearse in practice. When they pulled into the parking lot, the shrine was just as Elias had imagined. Nightmare of a tourist trap, one of those dreadful monuments to human gullibility. A gaunt priest offered a vial of what looked like tap water as they approached the fountain. Feeling at odds within himself, and yet posed with Isla's hopeful face, Elias paid the exorbitant fee, the act feeling like a profound surrender of his principles. When they returned home, he watched a knot of cynical dread in his stomach as Isla spoon-fed the clear liquid to their unconscious son. "See, not a damn thing," he whispered to himself lowly, making his grim prophecy. Then, the impossible happened. Hours later, a soft gasp escaped Leo's lips. Elias rushed to his bedside, his own heart a frantic drum. The boy's eyes fluttered open, not with the dull, listless gaze of the dying, but with a sharp, vibrant clarity. The color was visibly returning to his cheeks. Like magic. Suddenly, Leo's wheezing ceased. Within a day, Leo was asking for a sandwich, his voice thin but steady. A week passed, and he was running in the garden, a blur of pure, unfiltered, youthful energy. The doctor seemed speechless. He ran tests, shook his head, and muttered about spontaneous remission, going on a small tangent about statistical anomalies so rare they were almost mythical. Elias, however, couldn't shake the image of the shrine, of that simple vial. He told himself it was a powerful placebo, a collective delusion that had somehow, against all odds, jump-started Leo's will to live. But a flicker of something new, something unsettling, had taken root in his mind. He needed to prove the water's miraculous qualities. He needed to find the mechanism behind the cure. It hit him then, and Elias took a small, unlabeled sample from the remaining vial, a clandestine act he justified as an academic pursuit. At his company's lab, he slipped it in with other environmental samples. The results came back a week later, and they made no sense. The water's molecular structure was simple, H2O, with a few trace minerals, but it contained an anomaly, a subatomic particle that shouldn't exist in nature, a kind of quantum echo. He cross-referenced the signature with academic papers. Nothing. He tried private databases. He found one hit. It was a redacted file from a high-energy physics lab, a project with a chillingly vague code name, Project Ajisha. His investigation intensified. Elias used his connections, pulling strings and calling in favors. The trail led him to an article about a failed experiment at CERN. A new particle accelerator, a burst of energy, and a portal. A fleeting, terrifying window into another dimension? A sample was taken, a single-cell life form that vanished seconds after being extracted. But the God particle, a piece of its genetic makeup, was preserved. A particle with a unique property. It could rewrite genetic code at a cellular level. Elias's blood ran cold. The shrine, the priest, the holy water, it was all a front. They had dispersed the God particle, a desperate act to see what it would do. They had been testing it on the terminally ill, and Leo was their success story. He was so focused on the origin of the water they'd almost missed the signs in his own home. At first, they were small. Leo, who had struggled with simple algebra, was now diagramming complex molecular structures on a whiteboard in his room, his handwriting perfect and precise. Elias stared into the distance. His eyes glazed over and snapped back to reality with a strange look of recognition, as if he had just processed an immense amount of data. One night, Elias found Leo on the back porch, humming a tune that sounded like no melody he had ever heard, a haunting harmonic thrum that vibrated through the air. The worst part, the part that turned his stomach to ice, was the smile. Leo's smile, once so bright and innocent, now had a subtle, predatory curve. It wasn't the smile of his son. It was the smile of an ancient, patient being looking out through a child's eyes. Elias read the file again, a single line jumping out at him. Subject's consciousness will be integrated and assimilated by the particle host genome over time. Elias's mind, the one built on logic and reason, screamed with the truth. The miracle was the first stage of a parasitic takeover. The God particle hadn't healed his son, it had chosen him. It was a seed that now slowly, inexorably blooming. Elias looked at his son, who was now effortlessly stacking a house of cards on the coffee table, his movements too perfect, his focus too intense. The boy glanced up and met his father's gaze. The eyes were Leo's, but the expression was not. There was a glimmer of cosmic intelligence, a silent promise of takeover. Elias had been a skeptic his entire life, and now the universe had given him a truth so dark and so terrifying. He had wished he had never stopped believing in miracles. The ticking clock of his son's life wasn't over. It had just reset, and now it was counting down to something far, far worse than death. The Vessel by Sai Marie Johnson. The end.